With that, may I invite the panelists to be on the to come up on the stage. First, Lord Adair Turner, Chair of the Energy Transitions Commission. Dr. Bhiva Dhawan, Director General, TERI. Mr. Shivajyoti Datta from Tata Steel, and Mr. Murtuza Kakuji from Avada Group, and Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, TERI. I'll request Dr. Dhawan to have a few opening remarks. Followed by that, we'll have Lord Adair Turner's address, and then the panel discussion.
Thanks, Arup, and very hearty welcome to all the panelists. We don't see any audience, and I suppose that's largely, it's one of the first sessions in the morning, and many of us are staying at far off places, and like for us also, it's 1 hour of travel. But let's hope we'll have few, but otherwise I'll say, let's discuss amongst ourselves. Where are we and how to go forward? So very hearty welcome, and of course all of you are real experts in the field of energy transition, and I won't add saying why it is so important, but what I would like to say is that we cannot afford to walk with the baby steps. We really have to move very fast. And in that direction, the initiative that TERI has taken, and that is we are coming up with Institute on Energy Transition. It is planned, or rather it's already we have support letters from Ministry of Power, MNRE, and we are in discussion with the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, as well as Ministry of Environment and Forest. What we want, and rather why for this particular center, we haven't asked government for the financial support, because we want to make it autonomous, we want to make it multi-country, multi-institution. So what we are looking forward to, whatever expertise exists around the globe, and especially because a lot of research is also required if we are looking for solutions, especially for difficult to abate sector, hard to abate sectors. And over there, we are looking for partnerships like Innovate, 10 Industries crowdfunding. They come forward and we develop a sort of public good which can be used by all of them. We are also looking at capacity building in a big way, and that is not just restricted to India or the region, because capacities are required to absorb technology. And that goes all the way from, I should say, the CEOs who should appreciate that energy transition is important, to the person who will perhaps be dispensing hydrogen. Because the risks with some of the new technologies are high and we have to be extra careful. And even to look into where the technologies can be adopted, let's also realize that the world is very diverse. And of course, my own country, it is very, very diverse. And we have small and medium enterprises, a unit perhaps running in this size of room, all the way to Adani's and Ambani's and Tata's, the big infrastructures they have. And therefore, if we can solve problems within the country, if we can achieve energy transition in every discipline, perhaps we can show the way to the world. And that is the dream for in this Institute on Energy Transition. And I welcome you all to join and make it the best institute in the world. So thank you very much. And I look forward to our discussions now. Thank you.
May I invite Lord Adair Turner for his remarks.
Well, Good morning, everyone. I mean, I say everyone, but I feel we are a group small in number, but incredibly high in quality. And it's quality that matters. I would like to put forward some propositions for the group. I mean, we are really, debating this somewhat amongst ourselves, but that's an opportunity to really focus on some key issues. We've been asked to talk about energy sustainability as an industrial growth agenda, and that is what I would indeed like to end up with. I think that I would like to start by saying that as we think about the transition to a zero carbon economy, the good news is that we now have some sectors of the economy where that transition is low cost or close to costless. And that reflects the extraordinary reductions that we have seen in the cost and increases in the performance of key technologies. Most dramatically, of course, is solar PV. Solar PV per watt of power, the cost of that has gone down by 99.9% in the last 50 years. It has come down by about 60% even in the last 2 years. It is a quite dramatic improvement. Alongside that, we have this extraordinary fall occurring in the cost of batteries. Not just EV batteries, but of course, crucially, storage batteries as well. And I'm sure my colleague from Avada can talk about how incredibly cheap they are now able to buy storage batteries. These technologies and others make it now possible to envision building electricity systems which eventually will be almost entirely based on renewables, and to do so at costs which are below those of fossil fuels. And I sometimes think we have not yet realized how revolutionary those two technologies, solar plus batteries, are. Wind as well, but solar plus batteries. The Economist magazine on June the 21st, which of course is the Northern Hemisphere summer solstice, had an edition entirely devoted to what they called the solar age, with a picture of the sun on the front page. And I think they're absolutely right, because I think we have failed to realize that solar plus batteries is going to revolutionize electricity energy supply in all the equatorial and tropical areas of the world where there is lots and lots of sunshine. That is, I think, enormously important and creates a major industrial growth opportunity for those parts of the world. Another technology which is going from the period of development to the period of full cost competitiveness is electric vehicles. In China now, it is cheaper to buy an electric vehicle of a given performance and quality than to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle, whether we are talking about two-wheelers or four-wheelers. They are about 10 to 15% lower cost. We always knew that we would reach that point sometime, because electric vehicles are just much, much simpler things than internal combustion engines. They have far fewer moving parts. So in road transport as well, I think we are failing to understand the revolution which is about to sweep the world of the electrification of road transport, an electrification which I expect will extend not just to passenger cars, but to most of even quite heavy goods vehicles. And that is being driven just by the cost reductions in batteries, but also the performance increase in batteries. The energy density of batteries, how many kilowatt hours we can pack into a kilogram or a litre, are relentlessly increasing. So we have some technologies, electricity, electric vehicles, where the great news is we are heading into an era where we can seize this energy transition, reduce our emissions, and it will not cost the economy anything. It will become costless. We have to recognize, however, that there are some other sectors of the economy, and they are particularly the heavy industry, where there will, at least for several decades and maybe forever, be a green cost premium. Of those heavy industries, by far the most important are cement and steel. What we call the hard-to-abate sectors of the economy, in which we typically put shipping and aviation and chemicals and aluminium and fertilizers, ammonia and steel and cement, together account for about 30% of all emissions. But of that 30%, 18 out of the 30 is essentially cement and steel. So cement and steel are the really important ones. The good news is that across all of these hard-to-abate sectors of the economy, we now know the technologies that can get us to net zero. There is no doubt that we know how to produce steel using hydrogen direct reduction. There is no technological challenge about doing that. I remember being in Japan about 6 years ago with a major steel company, let me just call them that, and they described hydrogen direct reduction to me, and they said, oh, it's an interesting technology, we'll have it in the labs, we'll put it into pilot plants, and then maybe in the 2040s we'll have large commercial demonstrations, then 2050 to 70 we'll roll out. And then only 1 year later, I was in Luleå in northern Sweden visiting SSAB's hydrogen direction plant, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me, but they gave me a very nice 100 grams of steel produced in direct reduction. So we know how to decarbonize these sectors of the economy, but there is a cost. Right today, in order to produce a ton of steel using hydrogen direct reduction, there would be a significant cost premium against the coking coal route. In steel, it's possible that in the long term that cost premium may disappear if we get the cost of hydrogen electrolyzers, a renewable electricity, and therefore hydrogen low enough. I think by 2050, hydrogen may be a cheaper way to produce steel than coking coal. But for now, there is a cost premium. And as for cement, there will always be a cost premium, because for cement, the only way we know to get to net zero is to add carbon capture and storage to the existing processes. And if you are taking an existing process and adding an extra process, by definition, it will be higher cost. At least that was the case last time I checked how to do basic algebra. A plus B is greater than A, as long as A and B are positive numbers. So we have some sectors where we have a significant green cross premium for a significant period of time. We have others where it may be permanent. So we know how to decarbonize these. We have got to decarbonize these to meet climate objectives, but we have a green cost premium. It therefore follows absolutely clearly, and we need to be blunt about this, we will not get decarbonisation of these sectors of the economy without either carbon prices or some category of regulation. We need to either say, you're not allowed to use conventional jet fuel in planes, you've got to use sustainable aviation fuel, or we've got to have what's called a quantitative mandate, 10% of your fuel has got to be aviation, or we've got to have a carbon price, or we've got to have regulation. There's a variety of different ways you do it, but let's be clear, these sectors of the economy will not decarbonise for a long period of time without policy instruments. It is as simple as that. One of the clearest, strongest of those levers is carbon pricing. And Europe now has carbon pricing through the European Emissions Trading Scheme, which by the early 2030s will be at over 100 euros per tonne, and which will apply to all sectors of the economy. Up until now, steel and cement and other heavier duty sectors have enjoyed what are called free allowances. Those free allowances are being removed. All of that heavy industry will face a carbon price of over $100 a tonne. And at that level, that will force the decarbonisation, because at that level, that will cover the cost premium, and it will be economic to decarbonise those sectors of the economy. But we face a fundamental, difficult international coordination problem, which is that if Europe simply applies that in Europe, and there is no carbon price in India, or Turkey, or China, then those European sites will be uneconomic compared with Indian production or Chinese production, which is still being done in the old coking coal-based way. That is a fundamental problem, and Europe will go ahead, and the UK will go ahead, with a border carbon adjustment to deal with that problem. And I just want to make it plain, There is no doubt about it. It is not subject to negotiation. It is allowed by WTO rules, and we're going to do it because we've got to do it. Because otherwise we're just fooling ourselves. Otherwise we would be saying we are committed to decarbonize our own steel production, but actually we've just closed down our steel company, our steel business, and we're importing our high carbon steel from China or India. So we have to do that. It would be better if India imposed a carbon price, if China imposed a carbon price, if Turkey imposed a carbon price. But if they do not, we will have to have a border carbon adjustment. And I want to be absolutely plain, and this is the reason I wanted to put this on the table for us to debate. This is not protectionist. This is about maintaining a level playing field, and it is something that has to occur. Because if we don't do it, we're not trying to decarbonize global iron and steel. So my challenge is that countries like India have got to accept that Europe has a right to impose a border carbon adjustment and will impose a border carbon adjustment. But I think there is also a challenge to Europe as well, and it is this. It is possible that once we have carbon prices in Europe and border carbon adjustments, we may find that the cheapest places in the world to produce zero carbon primary iron is not Europe. Europe has primary iron, or did until recently, in South Wales and in the Ruhr Valley, because 150 years ago, that is where there was coking coal. They are located there for that reason. But in the future, the cheapest way to produce zero carbon steel, or iron I should read, may well not be in Northwest Europe, but in places where there is lots of sunshine, lots of cheap solar PV, lots of cheap wind, in Morocco, Mauritania, maybe India, Australia, Namibia. And I think we have to accept in Europe that if once we have a level playing field, it turns out that the cheapest place to produce primary iron or other commodities such as chemicals is not in Europe, but is in the sunny parts of the world, we should accept that. So I want to just end, therefore, with, can we agree what we both need to accept in a debate between Europe and some developing countries? One, the developing countries, China, I don't count China as a developing country any longer, actually, but China, India, non-European countries. My challenge is, you have to accept we will do a CBAM, and we are right to do that, and your response should be to introduce carbon pricing, because we have to have a level playing field. But from the other way around, Europe, if once we have that level playing field, we are not the economic place to produce zero carbon iron, we shouldn't hold on to that, because we should want that to be an industrial growth opportunity in Africa, in India, and other parts of the world. So that is the challenge which, in this small group, I just wanted to put on the table and see whether there's any agreement on it. Thank you very much.
May I request Rashmi sir to take forward the conversation with the panelists, please?
Thank you, Arup, and once again, good morning to everyone here. A very good morning. We have listened to Dr. Dhawan and Lord Turner. It was really wonderful listening to his impassioned speech and intervention on some of the critical issues. And we have two leaders from the industry who can brief us or maybe give a response to the issues that Lord Turner has raised, and then I'll have some comments towards the end. Let me first, the issues which he has raised fundamentally relate to the pricing of carbon as a possible instrument for industrial decarbonization. This is a demand side measure where the taxation as an instrument of policy would be used to push or encourage the industry to use non-fossil fuel based technologies. There are other supply side interventions as well, which are already in the offing, and some of them are in place. The industry knows about them, so it will be good to learn from you about the kind of demand side or supply side interventions that are possible and the potential of industrial decarbonization in India. So let me first go, and we have Mr. Murtaza Thakurji, who is representing Avada, a major a player in the renewable energy segment. Mr. Shivajyoti Datta, another representative of Tata Steel. So let me begin with you, Mr. Datta. How do you see the steel industry responding to these issues? And what do you think is the potential and what are the constraints there?
Thank you. I think Lord Turner actually set up the context very well, and he has touched upon the plights, challenges, and the opportunity of steel equally well. I see today the panel, we have policy understanding very clear, Lord Turner and his team, the facilitator in the form of Terry, the implementers, kind of logistics partners from the renewable energy sector, and we the energy consumers today, we are the polluters. I see there is a significant challenge in terms of transition, and the transition, we need an energy transition, and that's a must. In order to fight the climate change, the transition has to get into a position where we are able to survive, coexist in an economy where there is no additional cost, but it is the business as usual scenario. Today it is not. Today the cost of transition, particularly if I look at hydrogen-based economy, is massive, and CBAM perfectly justifies a framework which gives us some of the geographies to operate. But there is a debate. As of now, the world is, I think, split into two. One says it's a trade to technical barrier to trade, and there is another school of thought which says that this is the starting framework for the future tomorrow, where you can balance out the cost of additional emissions, and it's a must. Today we are running out of time. We are looking at a 2050 net zero. Our company is looking for an ambitious target for 2045, but we are all skeptical. It's a very huge challenge to achieve a net zero by 2050. Some of the speakers I heard yesterday from the food sector, from the cement sector, they are equally concerned. But we see a significant hope. As Lord Turner also mentioned, the technologies are there. So today we have at least one technology which is hydrogen-based DRI, which can give us steel at zero carbon, but it comes with a cost. How do we solve the cost? We internally debated this, and we found that today the hydrogen scale is not there. As a result, the logistics is not there, the cost of production is very high. It's in a kind of a maturity of technology that we are looking at forward to. We also see a hope when Lord Turner mentioned in last 50 years, we saw a 99.9% reduction in the cost of solar. That's a huge news. And that's what if we put in the case of hydrogen, when I see a 2040, 2045 global economy running mostly on hydrogen, I'm sure the differential cost will significantly come down. But the challenge is, how do you transition smoothly? That's a big challenge. And that's where I think the leaders, leading companies, the leading community players will come to a significant place where they can produce more and more operations, economical activities together. We believe that we are in a position where we should be able to collaborate with all the stakeholders, right from policymakers to our peers, the partners, to transform the economy in a manner which is just, which is timely, and which is speedy enough to reach our international goal. So we are hoping for this, and additionally with that, we are also looking at significant amount of R&D so that we just don't have a DRI hydrogen route. We also have many more, which is like electrolysis of iron ore, maybe storage solutions. So we're looking forward to that, and the future is, I think, quite bright. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Datta. May I come back with a small question? You said that you're convinced with the necessity of making this initiative for decarbonization, but you also say that you are skeptical because the technology costs are still very high, the cost of hydrogen. So what are the ways in which you think the cost of hydrogen can be reduced?
I think that the biggest scale is the scale of operations. Today, I don't see hydrogen which is bigger than, let's say, 20 TPD. Tons per day. You imagine that that's the scale that we are looking at today. The costs are obviously skyrocketing. But when we operate a steel plant, at Jamshedpur we operate a 10 million ton plant. In order to run a 10 million ton plant, you need 0.7 to 1 million ton of hydrogen every year. 10 TPD plant won't survive that. Now you understand the scaling up. The moment you do, we have seen technologies. The moment they have been scaled up, the supply and demand has increased. That has brought down the cost significantly. That's where we are hoping for. And in the transition, you have to have our cost of carbon emissions, adjustments of the cost so that we can share this economic burden equally. And that's why we are right now stuck. Today we are stuck because we are not able to take steps in India, that kind of steps that we are able to commit in UK. We are transitioning in UK, but we are not able to do that in India. And one of the reasons we are able to transition because we are getting a level playing field there. One of the reasons is also CBAM. In India, we don't have that. So that's a point that we need to solve together.
All right. So what you are saying is that the one of the possible ways of reducing not reducing the cost because the cost is inelastic at this moment, at least in the next 10 years, the costs are not going to come down unless the technology changes. But there is a way of sharing the cost or maybe dispersing the cost across the economy, maybe through a taxation measure or some other innovative measure. I'll come back to you on this issue once again. Let me first go to Mr. Kakuji. With your experience in the renewable energy area, do you have any message for the industries in hard to abate sectors?
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity. I just want to give a background and I just want to relate to what point my colleague just mentioned is in 2009-10 when we first constructed the first solar plant in Gujarat, that time the tariff was 18 rupees per unit. And it was a vision of a chief minister then that he wants to start the solar journey in the country and he was ready to pay 18 rupees per unit that time to kickstart an industry wherein the coal price or the power from the coal industry or from thermal power was close to 6 to 7 rupees that time. With that effort, right now this cost has come down to 2.5 rupees from ET. And we need to start somewhere. So right now we're talking about cost of hydrogen. I know it's on a higher side when you compare to blue or grey hydrogen right now. But we need to start somewhere. The other thing which we can talk about in terms of reduction of cost is the electricity cost. I think one of the major components of higher green hydrogen is the electricity cost. And electricity cost will come down with the facilities which are currently being provided in terms of storage, because we all know that RE energy is intermittent power. We will not basically have RE-RTC unless we have a storage solution in place. And to have a storage solution in place, we need to basically bring down the cost of storage, because then only we'll be able to bring down the cost of RE. Government is taking a lot of steps in giving banking facilities right now for the Indian players to basically bank the energy in the grid. And in India, we are blessed basically to have such a powerful grid wherein we are able to bank at least energy for 3 to 4 hours, which we'll be able to consume during the non-intermittent power. But that doesn't stop us as a developer, which basically allows us to invest in technologies like pump storage, battery solutions, which will basically allow us to get the RE-RTC power. And I think we are already in discussion with a lot of steel players who are basically worried about CBAM getting implemented in June 2025 and their product getting obsolete there. So they are actually started demanding for RE-RTC. So as a developer, I see a big market which talks about hard to abate sector, They cannot close their eyes and say, "Okay, yaar, we will take up the solution once the challenge arrives." They have started preparing for it. They have started asking for RE-RTC for it. And as a developer, an IPP player in India right now, it is our responsibility to give them a solution which basically is cost efficient to them as well, which allows them to work on a level playing field outside as well. And we request support from the government, which we already have mentioned in multiple forums, to support the industry in green hydrogen.
Thanks. So what you're saying is that the CBAM is pushing or encouraging the industry to use the RTC, round-the-clock energy, renewable energy, and that would also help bring down the costs across the economy. That's a very positive message. Let me just add a few of my points, thoughts to this issue. While the sector may be the specific industrial sectors will have their different levels of readiness. But at the economy-wide level, one important point that we need to perhaps recognize when we talk of pricing of carbon, one is that India is an economy that has not yet peaked. Whereas most of the other industrial economies where industrial decarbonization is being undertaken, they have already peaked. So there is the emissions have become stable more or less. But in a state of rising emissions, use of carbon pricing as an instrument, how does it impact on the economy as a whole and the specific industries? That's a question I think we need to understand and go a little deeper into this. So there are a number of possible ways which people are, other instruments which people are discussing, is that instead of a direct pricing, can we use either a regulatory measure or an indirect pricing of carbon? For example, a cap. Currently, for some of the industries, there are 9 sectors which they have identified in the carbon credit trading system of India, which would be subjected to some kind of an emissions intensity target. So it's a target-based measure which puts a relative cap on the emissions, and it's also, forces the industry to adopt to use an indirect pricing instrument. So whether that would be an appropriate way of in decarbonization in economies like India, which are yet to peak, that's a question which I would love to hear your response on that. The second is the cost, the measures to bring down the cost of technologies, batteries, hydrogen. What is the best way of doing that? How do we scale up the demand for these alternative fuels and alternative technologies? Again, regulatory signals are perhaps important. In the case of renewable energy, we have tried government procurement. So are there any other instruments possible in the case of hard-to-abate sectors where we can think of measures like this which can scale up? One thought which comes to me is that of responsible procurement by industry itself. Rather than relying on the government, the industry perhaps is given a regulatory guideline or a signal that all of them, they need to change their supply chain in a way that they start moving towards low carbon fuels, low carbon equipment, low carbon systems. And then that brings down the overall carbon consumption in the industries. I think these are the two small points, and I'll come back to you if you have any response to the points that the two speakers have made.
Thank you. Well, I'd love to respond to the point that you've just made, because I am not convinced that the fact that India has not yet peaked emissions carries an implication for or against carbon pricing in these sectors of the economy. I don't think it is an argument, and let me construct my own point of view on this. One, I think it's important to realize that when you go down the carbon pricing route, you do not have to apply it to all of an economy. So the European Emissions Trading Scheme, as initially developed, really only applied to the power sector of the economy, and because of free allowances, did not apply to the hard-to-abate sectors of the economy, and it did not apply, for instance, for domestic gas for heating, which is very important in northwest Europe. It applied to some sectors of the economy where it was a particularly effective instrument. It will now be extended to cover the hard-to-abate sectors of the economy, the heavy industry sectors, but it will not apply to domestic gas. And I don't want it to apply to domestic gas, because if you apply it to domestic gas, you have a very major distributional effect on low-income people, right? Because it is a large part of their budget in Northwest Europe what they apply for domestic gas. So when I'm dealing with residential heating in the UK and Northwest Europe, I want to use other instruments like subsidies and support and regulation to get people to install heat pumps, but I am cautious of the price instrument. So you can choose to apply a price instrument to some sectors of the economy, not others. If you apply it, for instance, in India, suppose you applied it just to steel and cement. It would be absolutely possible to do that. I think the application of a carbon price, let us suppose just as a tax, to cement and steel in India would have essentially no impact, adverse impact whatsoever on the Indian rate of growth, nor on Indian standards of living. The most important thing to understand about steel is that this problem of the green cost premium is a significant problem at the business-to-business level if we are talking about one responsible steel company which is heading towards a zero carbon steel production and another which is not doing. It's a problem there. But at the level of the end consumer, it isn't a problem at all. Because if you increase the cost of a ton of steel by 50%, what does that do to the cost of a two-wheeler made out of steel? Or the cost of a washing machine made out of steel? Or an aircon unit made with steel? It will increase that by less than 1%. It is an absolutely trivial effect at the consumer level. And therefore, it will not have an impact on the standard of living of Indian people or the growth rate of the Indian economy. And let us remember that although that cost will go up by that amount, the government will have revenue equal to that amount. So if there are some very, very small distributional impacts, it can use that revenue to offset them. So my belief is the fact that India, you're quite right, has not yet peaked emissions and will not for some time, does not have a relevance to this debate. I can't see why it is relevant to this debate. I cannot see any disadvantage to Indian economic growth or to the standard of living of ordinary Indian people of India now imposing a carbon price on cement and steel production. And that is what I think India should do, because otherwise, let's be clear, you are going to pay a carbon price, but you're going to pay it to Europe, right? Because we will impose a border carbon adjustment and we will receive the tax revenue at the border of Britain, of Europe and Britain. We don't want to receive that tax revenue. We want the Indian government to receive that tax revenue. So that is my argument. I think, one has to get really granular about it, but I would urge, and nobody has been able to give me an argument as to why it would not be in India's interest now to have a carbon tax specifically on these sectors of the economy.
The second point was also about the cost of technologies, how they can be brought down, and what are the possible instruments.
Ultimately, you get the cost down with scale economies. I mean, let's be clear, in hydrogen DRI, what matters is the cost of hydrogen, and for the cost of hydrogen, only two things matter: the cost of the electrolyzers and the cost of the green electricity that you put into the electrolyzers. The cost of the electrolyzers has not come down over the last 5 years as rapidly as we hoped. There has been a major divergence between the cost of solar PV coming down faster than we anticipated, the cost of battery storage coming down faster than we anticipated, but so far the cost of the electrolyzers not falling as fast as we anticipated. I think that is partly a chicken and egg issue. I think it's partly about scale. And so the faster we can develop scale, the more that we will drive the cost down. So if we were to manage to get an agreement between, for instance, the European Union, China, and India, that we were all going to apply a $100 a ton carbon price to all our steel industries with a joint CBAM against any country in the world which didn't apply that, such as the USA. Now that would be an interesting piece of politics if we could, all three of us, agree to have a joint CBAM against the USA because they didn't have a carbon price. If we did that, I think that would create such extraordinary certainty about the way the steel industry of the world would going that you would see scale developments in electrolyzer production where the costs will come down. As for the cost of electricity, it is coming down. And the crucial thing here is what is the relevant cost of electricity. Actually, even if electrolyzer costs are quite high, if your electricity price is really, really low, you can get your hydrogen price down. And one of the interesting features, of course, of a renewable energy system is that the electricity price will be very, very cheap in some times of the day. There is a big difference between the round-the-clock price versus the price when the sun is shining or when the wind is blowing. I don't think we know what will be the balance of whether we will run electrolyzers at high utilization with an average cost of electricity or whether we'll run them at low utilization but using electricity at the cheapest points. But either way, I am confident that if we had the scale, we would drive the cost of electrolyzers down. Now, of course, the impact on the short term would be a higher cost of steel. Let's be clear, that would be a higher cost of steel. It might come down over time by competition, but a higher cost of steel would also induce all sorts of efficiencies across the rest of the economy. Steel, the two core ways that we use steel are automotive and construction. There are other ways as well, but those are the two cores. There are very significant opportunities in both to use less steel, but to use it more efficiently. You can devise, and if we had a higher price for steel, I'm absolutely sure that the automotive companies would work out how to tweak automotive design to take some of the steel out, maybe substitute aluminium instead, and certainly in construction, and this applies hugely to cement as well as steel, there are enormous opportunities in construction to use less cement and concrete. And one of the reasons why we don't seize that is that cement and concrete is sufficiently cheap that architects and building designers don't really think through how much they need. At the margin, they just say, let's just have some more cement and concrete to make sure the building's safe. We could build buildings with much less cement and concrete, and if we had a higher price of cement, that would be an incentive to do that.
Thank you, Lord Turner. In fact, the debate about the pricing of carbon is more or less settled within in the domestic context. Whether it is direct pricing or indirect pricing is an issue that is still under consideration. As I was mentioning in the CCTS, in a way they have already decided to go down a target-based approach, which would be a relative emissions intensity target for 9 sectors, including steel and cement. So in a way the process has begun. But the fundamental question which you are raising is that there is a CBAM, so we need to prepare ourselves for the CBAM. But that's a purely competitive question. I think we will have some other opportunity to discuss that issue. But there is absolutely no doubt that we need to, the industry needs to prepare itself for this eventuality, and they need to invest both in innovation and the scaling up has to be done as far as the demand is concerned to be able to bring the prices down. With this, I think we have almost completed our time budget. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time out to spend with us and giving us your thoughts. And thank you, Kakuji and Mr. Datta also, to you for spending your time with us. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Good. the lowest price?